Ever heard of a company like going from $1 billion valuation to, well, practically worthless, like overnight?
It happens, sadly. It's more common than you might think in the world of business.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, what happens next? That's what we're diving into today, right?
So that's right.
India's Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the IBC.
It's a system, you could say, designed to bring some kind of order to the chaos when a company fails.
You sent over some really interesting articles about this, and um, it seems like the IBC, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, it's meant to help businesses when they're in trouble, but it's also like reshaping the entire playing field, right?
It is, yeah. It's reshaping the entire economic landscape in India.
So for those of us who aren't lawyers or CEOs, why does this even matter? Why are we talking about this?
Well, before the IBC, imagine, a system where loan defaults were like everywhere and actually recovering your money as a lender was, well, about as likely as finding a unicorn.
It sounds like the Wild West, but for finance, right?
Exactly. And that created a very risky environment for lenders and investors, which in the end, of course, hurt economic growth.
Yeah, makes sense.
India had like this hodgepodge of old laws that made dealing with insolvency a total nightmare.
The nightmare house, oh.
Like it was just this long, drawn-out process. The IBC was introduced in 2016 to change all that.
A financial system upgrade, so to speak.
Yeah, precisely. The goal was to really shift the power,
Yeah.
from those who owed money, the debtors, to the creditors.
To those who are owed money.
Right, and to make the process way more transparent and maybe most importantly, make it time-bound. So you know when this is going to happen, how long it's going to take.
Okay, so how does this system upgrade actually work in the real world? Let's say there's a company and they've defaulted on, their loans. What's the first step?
So the IBC process can actually be initiated by the company itself.
Really?
Yeah, or by a financial creditor like a bank, or even like an operational creditor, someone they do business with, like a supplier, for example.
Interesting.
Once a case is admitted, the company's existing management is basically put on hold, and what they call an insolvency professional steps in.
So it's like a financial timeout
Yeah, exactly.
with a referee brought in to oversee everything and make sure like everything's fair.
Yeah, precisely. And that insolvency professional, their job is to really figure out what's going on, assess the situation, and determine if the company can even be saved.
Rescued, you mean?
Yeah, rescued, right. It could involve like restructuring the debt the company has, or finding new investors, or even selling off parts of the business. And this rescue plan, it's called a resolution plan within the IBC framework.
And what happens if they can't come up with a plan?
If all else fails, the company has to face liquidation. But here's the key difference the IBC brings in. The entire process, from the beginning to the resolution or liquidation, runs on a really strict timeline.
No more dragging things out for years and years in court.
Exactly. The IBC usually mandates a 270-day timeline. There are extensions possible, though, under certain circumstances, but still.
Wow, that's a lot faster.
Yeah, it really puts the pressure on everyone to find a solution that works quickly.
270 days to figure out, like, sometimes years of financial problems. That's incredibly fast. But it makes you wonder, are there downsides to moving this quickly? I mean, is there a rush to judgment?
That's a great point. It's actually something that was highlighted in the SR Steel case, one of the most, well-known IBC cases so far.
The one with the multi-billion-dollar debt, right?
That's the one. It took over 2 years to resolve, mostly because of appeals and legal challenges, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. In this case, it really showed a crucial tension within the IBC.
Which is?
You need to resolve cases quickly, but you also need to ensure that every legal avenue is explored. It's a tough balancing act. There are no easy answers.
High stakes, for sure, especially with so much money on the line. It's clear that while the IBC aims to create this more efficient system, well, the SR Steel case is a great example of how it's not always smooth sailing. It's amazing how one case, like SR Steel, can show both the good and the, well, not so good parts of something like the IBC. Right?
Absolutely. It reminds us that even though speed and getting things done quickly is important, we got to make sure it's fair for everyone involved. Level playing field.
Which brings us to something else interesting about the IBC, those MSMEs you mentioned before.
Right.
You said they have these like special provisions under this code.
They do. MSMEs are like the backbone of the Indian economy, right? So they're given some flexibility under the IBC. It's largely because they're more vulnerable to like economic shocks. The IBC recognizes that maybe you need a different approach to help them recover and keep things moving.
It makes sense to have different rules for smaller businesses, I guess. But it also sounds like it could create some, I don't know, opportunities for some people to take advantage, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. One of the articles you shared pointed out this trend, promoters of these bigger companies trying to game the system.
What do you mean?
They're like artificially making their companies smaller, manipulating things so they fit the definition of an MSME when they go into the IBC process.
So they're trying to benefit from those easier rules for MSMEs.
Exactly. They're trying to fit into a smaller pair of shoes, so to speak. See, under the IBC, if you're a promoter of a larger company and you default on your debts, you're usually barred from putting forward your own resolution plan. It's about accountability.
Okay.
But for MSMEs, the rules are more flexible. They give promoters more of a chance to keep control, even if it means lenders have to accept less money back.
So there's a real worry that this loophole could weaken the whole IBC system, right?
Right. There's more and more pressure on the government and regulators to close this loophole for sure. Banks especially, they're pushing for changes to the IBC to prevent this kind of manipulation from happening.
What can they really do, though?
One idea is to base the MSME classification on the company's financial status from when it first defaulted, not just when it enters the IBC process.
So look at the bigger picture.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
It seems logical, but even if they close this loophole, it's just one piece of the puzzle for the future of the IBC.
There are more challenges.
Even though the IBC tries to speed things up, cases can get bogged down in these long legal battles, especially when you have these big companies and huge amounts of money involved.
It's just like those courtroom dramas on TV, right? Lawyers always filing motions and delaying things.
Exactly. And all those legal games, they eat into that 270-day timeline.
Which defeats the whole purpose.
Exactly. So there's this push to make the process even smoother.
What does that even look like, though? How do you make it smoother?
One idea is to have specialized benches within the NCLT, that's the National Company Law Tribunal, the court specifically for IBC cases.
So like a fast-track court just for insolvency and bankruptcy.
Yeah, exactly. The goal is to speed things up, prevent those unnecessary delays, and really minimize the damage to the economy that happens with corporate insolvency.
I mean, that makes sense. When a company collapses, it's like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
It impacts everyone.
Right. A faster resolution means less uncertainty for everyone. Creditors can get their money back quicker, businesses that can be saved can be restructured and revived, and ultimately the impact on jobs and the economy is smaller.
So speed and efficiency are key, but so is making sure the system is fair. Sounds like a delicate balancing act. Are there other things about the IBC that need tweaking?
Yeah, there's this ongoing discussion about what role the government should play in the IBC process.
They're not just a bystander in all this, right?
Yeah. Not at all. The government has a huge interest in seeing the IBC work because a healthy system for dealing with insolvency attracts investment and helps the economy grow. So even though the IBC is supposed to be market-driven, there are people calling for the government to keep a closer eye on things.
What do you mean keep a closer eye on things?
Well, some folks, some experts and industry leaders are saying there should be a dedicated agency to oversee the entire IBC process, like a super regulator just for insolvency cases to make sure everything's transparent, consistent, and accountable.
So the IBC is far from a done deal then. It sounds like there's still a lot of discussion and debate about how to improve it.
Yeah, it's constantly changing to meet new challenges in our economic landscape. It's a living, breathing thing.
It's fascinating, really. The SR Steel case showed that tension between speed and fairness, and the MSME thing shows how tough implementation can be and how important it is to adapt.
Yeah, you got it. And it shows how a system like the IBC, even though it's designed with the best intentions, can have unexpected consequences that need fixing. It's a work in progress, for sure.
It's like having this roadmap to this constantly shifting landscape, and that's important for anyone involved in business and finance in India. But this roadmap isn't just for big corporations, is it? This impacts everyone, right? From small business owners to everyday investors.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Understanding the IBC, even just the basics, can be so beneficial. It helps you make smarter decisions, whether you're lending money, borrowing money, or just trying to understand the Indian business world as a whole.
Knowledge is power, they say. Speaking of which, what's next on our list as we continue this deep dive into the IBC? It's really eye-opening, to see just how much is involved when a business is struggling. It's not just about the numbers, right?
No, not at all.
It's about people's livelihoods, investments, and how it all impacts the economy as a whole.
Yeah, you've got it. It's high stakes, for sure. And the IBC is really there to help manage all of that, those consequences.
So for our listeners, especially those involved in business and finance in India, What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into insolvency and bankruptcy? What do they need to remember?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the IBC, it's not just for these huge companies going bankrupt. It's about creating a system that works, a system for handling financial distress.
Whether it's a big corporation or a small business.
Exactly. Doesn't matter the size. And this affects everyone. If you're a small business owner, an investor, even just a consumer, this impacts you.
It's like learning this whole new set of rules.
That's a great way to put it. Like, you got to think differently now about risk and recovery.
Yeah, yeah. And like with anything new, there's going to be a learning curve, right?
Absolutely. It's so crucial to stay up to date on the IBC, how it's changing, and how it could affect the decisions you make about your finances.
And that's what we're here for, to break it all down and make it easy to understand.
Definitely. Knowledge is power, right? Especially with something as complex and ever-changing as business in India.
Right. Before we go, I always like to leave our listeners with something to think about. So throughout this deep dive, we've been looking at the IBC from the perspective of, debtors and creditors.
Right.
But what if we shifted that perspective?
Okay, I like where this is going. How do you mean?
Well, think about it. Sometimes insolvency, it's painful, but it's a chance to start fresh.
Right, right.
It forces businesses to face their problems, make changes, and they can actually come out stronger in the end, more resilient.
Like a phoenix rising from the ashes.
Exactly. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from the IBC. Even when things fail, there's always a possibility for renewal, for growth. And that's a pretty powerful message for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. It's about finding opportunity, even in the toughest times.
That's a great place to wrap up. As always, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.